What's up, everybody? John the Morgal here, back again with another static plane truth video. I wanted to start by mentioning that the truth cannot be a theory. Theories can be accepted or assumed to be true, but can be proven false. The truth, on the other hand, cannot be proved as false and therefore cannot be classified as a theory. So, for example, while what goes up must come down is the truth, gravity is a theory to explain this truth, assuming the Earth is a spinning sphere in the void of space, of course. The point here is the truth is not some bizarre conspiracy theory like the moon is made of cheese or Michelle Obama isn't actually a man, but he's a reptilian shapeshifter from the constellation Draco. This is important to get out of the way ASAP, as most people apparently categorize the truth with such wild theories, and this simply isn't the case. Conspiracies are defined as situations where multiple people get together secretly to construct a, nefarious plan, or to some end or another. NASA and the like have certainly conspired against civilization by faking space in order to perpetuate their existence. In all honesty, most people, especially astronomers and theoretical physicists, are not the conspirators. They, like everyone else, including myself, were tricked into believing an absurd theory is scientific fact, just as sure as gravity, since we all know what goes up must come down is exclusive proof that we live stuck to the side of a spinning sphere in the void of space, of course. The truth is, the Earth is a stationary plane, so the physical law, what goes up must come down, is certainly compatible with the fact that the world is a stationary plane. It's much more simple. If you actually think about this, what goes up must come down is rather absurd if you assume the Earth to be a spinning ball and is in no way exclusive proof of the theory of gravity. Furthermore, it's been shown that the heliocentric model doesn't work in theory or reality. This means infinite space doesn't exist, and the prevailing modern worldview is founded upon propaganda, currently generated by the federal government and propagated mostly unwittingly by popular fiction, science, and the mainstream media, as well as just the people at large who are repeating what they've heard or mimicking what they've been led to believe for their entire lives by the cult of scientism. Our belief systems are formed most solidly during adolescence, formed by what we see, hear, and experience. Unfortunately, most of what we see, hear, and experience, or a good chunk of it, comes from people following the guidelines of a government with designs on controlling everyone's mind to an astonishing extent. Of course, government, the word, etymologically translates directly to mind control. You can look that up. However, the extent of this mind control and the intense effects this has on us is difficult to fully comprehend from within the hypothetical construct we've been forced to accept. We should pay attention to nature, as the world itself will answer any questions you ask it. Physical, repeatable experiments and logical conclusions based on observing and measuring reality are the best method to understanding reality properly. Instead of direct measurement and experiment, theoretical astrophysics is exactly biased conjecture, inseparable from a litany of dogmatic beliefs, all stemming from the fundamental premise that the
world is a sphere in the vacuum of space, and ultimately the Copernican principle,
or the mediocrity principle, but real measurements and observations of the world around us obviously contradict the notion that we're spinning on an axis upon a ball orbiting the sun in space. If this theory were correct, it would be extremely easy to demonstrate the curvature and axial rotation of the world for starters. However, all physical experiments applied to reality objectively show the world to be stationary and lacking the necessary curvature to result in a spherical world. The grandfathers of theoretical physics and the spherical Earth philosophy lacked modern technologies we all take very much for granted. For example, manned flight in airplanes, footage from weather balloons, gunpowder, long-range projectiles, long-range communication, the understanding of electromagnetism, high-powered telescopes, and even high-resolution digital imagery, and so on and so forth. Compared to the ancients, we are, and really even compared to people 100 or 200 years ago, we are far more adequately equipped with technologies to know things and prove things conclusively that they could only imagine or debate or believe. For example, what does the Earth look like from 20 miles in altitude? That could only be speculated upon until, the advent of the weather balloon, and of course the ability to record the images or video coming back from that. We have endless methods to prove whether the Earth is stationary and without curvature, or, contrarily, it's a spinning sphere. We can prove this one way or another. Now, apparently, the faulty fundamental principles governing our worldview are a gross series of misunderstandings historically and bold-faced lies coming from the modern government agencies such as NASA. I've just stumbled upon another astonishing observation of astronomy which completely discredits the heliocentric model and proves it as incompatible with observable reality. If you look at the heliocentric model, you'll notice that Mercury and Venus are allegedly closer to the Sun than the Earth is. Agreed? Or their alleged orbital path is tighter around the Sun than the Earth's alleged orbital path. If you look at the diagram series here and understand some fundamental principles which are never really considered that much in the heliocentric model, it's indeed irrefutable proof that the heliocentric model doesn't work. So here are the basics. We can obviously never observe the planets during the daytime, as they are too faint of lights, so we simply should never see Venus or Mercury from the ground, period. We can only view the Sun and Moon during the daytime, but these two planets would always be on the day side of the Earth forever, no exceptions. From the time the Sun rises till the time it sets, the Sun itself renders the sky a reflective blue, impenetrable to all starlight, and of course, we can only see the Sun and the Moon during the day. Sure, we can see certain stars and wandering stars during the twilight hours, but in terms of daytime, you cannot see the stars, nor the so-called planets or the wandering stars. Now, since Mercury and Venus are alleged to orbit the Sun more closely than the Earth, there's no possible set of circumstances which would allow any observer to see Mercury or Venus any time during the night. It would always be on the daytime, day side of Earth. Mercury and Venus would always be aligned to that day side or inside of the path of orbit of the Earth, and would therefore never be visible at night, according to the heliocentric model itself. And regardless of how you try and finagle the heliocentric model to allow for Venus and Mercury being visible at night, which indeed they are, it simply cannot occur in your model. Therefore, the heliocentric model doesn't adequately describe reality in the slightest. So you can choose between one of the two things. Either Venus and Mercury must no longer be closer to the Sun than the Earth, or you must discard the heliocentric model, right? These images are clear disproof of the heliocentric model. The first one shows Venus at night directly next to a crescent moon at night, which, by the way, the crescent moon at night would also be impossible. Both of these observations, so Venus at night and the crescent moon at night, are incompatible with the heliocentric model. We'll get into this in a little better detail in terms of the moon, But the simple fact is, Venus could never possibly be viewed at night, assuming the heliocentric model. The so-called planets allegedly adhere to the ecliptic, or a common plane of orbit around the sun, more or less, since daytime is always represented as the direction towards the inside of the Earth's orbital path, or the side facing the sun, regardless of spin or regardless of axial rotation, while nighttime would always be represented as the direction opposite the sun, or midnight at least would be represented as the direction opposite the sun, or the outside of the path of orbit. If you actually think about this logically, Venus and Mercury should have never been discovered and couldn't possibly be visible at night if we're really humoring and scrutinizing the heliocentric model. The second image shows Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter 30 minutes after sunset, all in the same image. And I find this image sort of amusing and, really just excellent proof because it totally debunks the heliocentric model yet again. A picture truly is worth 1,000 words. Jupiter should only be visible during the nighttime, for one. This is due to its alleged position being further away from the Earth, or with a wider path, orbital path around the Sun, allegedly. And so it would only be visible on the night side, since it's further away from the Sun, and hence we'd need to face away from the Sun to see it. Now, of course, there would be conditions when it's hypothetically, or Jupiter is hypothetically on the opposite side of the Sun as the Earth, but that would be the daytime side, according to us, so we wouldn't be able to see it. So again, Jupiter should only be visible during the nighttime, and Mercury and Venus should only be visible during the day, and yet there they are, all three in the same frame 30 minutes after sunset. Wow, I mean, that's a pretty big deal if you think about it. And I'm really curious to know how two planets, which should be only visible during the day, could be seen nearly aligned to Jupiter 30 minutes after sunset. This is extremely damning evidence against the heliocentric model. Both of these two images that you're seeing here are. And as I've mentioned, I'll get back into the moon phases in a bit. Because this has been argued a little bit, and I just wanted to, end the discussion on that, because it is a solid piece of evidence against the heliocentric model. Now, the federal government and mainstream media spend untold sums of money manipulating the associations we subconsciously form between images or phrases with specific concepts. We all have a picture in our mind linked to words and concepts. For example, the word or concept of Earth will sort of summon a picture in everyone's mind. Contrarily, we're programmed to imagine a laughable, contrived image in our mind related to the phrase or idea of flat Earth. When considering the word Earth, most people will conjure up an image of the blue marble forgery from the faked Apollo missions, allegedly, which was used in every textbook, documentary, and presentation for many decades, and in any media relating to using a picture of the planet Earth from space, in quotes. I honestly remember as a child thinking this was really sort of disenchanting, as I noticed that whenever you studied anything having to do with the planets, you would either see an obvious drawing or image of Earth, or that one single forged picture from the Apollo missions. It had been, at that point, a couple of decades since the picture was allegedly snapped, yet that was the image you would find in every single reference, textbook, documentary, whatever, even leading up through high school and college, for many decades, that was it. That was the picture of the Earth. Of course, now you can find hundreds of what are obviously CGI composites of the allegedly spherical Earth taken from satellites, but I have huge problems with this, the claims made by space agencies. For one thing, you can watch the so-called International Space Station, the ISS live feed, and you'll rarely get a discernible glimpse of the land or the coastlines, mainly due to atmospheric refraction and the reflective nature of the atmosphere and clouds and that sort of thing. But typically, all you can see are the tops of clouds and the rich blue or sometimes dull gray atmosphere beneath. You'll never, ever, ever see city lights or lightning strikes from the ISS during the live feed, even during the night. You'll only see those sort of videos with, the city lights and lightning bolts as computer-generated animations later on. And this is proven very clearly because it's known that tornado watchers, tornado experts, meteorologists who are responsible for warning people that a tornado is imminent could very much use satellite data, if such a thing existed, to increase their warning time of tornadoes based on the frequency of lightning strikes. But for some reason, NASA won't allow the meteorologists and tornado watchers access to this, and I would submit that's because it doesn't exist. What we have, if we have anything coming from NASA, is probably coming from high-altitude flights or high-altitude weather balloons, which are, by the way, geostationary satellites. But anyway, all that stuff from NASA is either trick photography or post-production enhancements. The point being, NASA has been faking space and the spherical Earth for its entire existence. I think 1958, whatever. Now, there are plenty of possible motives for this, but since NASA is part of the government, we can assume that their primary objective is mind control, because again, government etymologically translates to mind control. And we can assume that NASA is not really concerned with space travel, but rather convincing us that they're concerned with space travel. And so they will fabricate missions and fabricate evidence to perpetuate their need to exist and perpetuate the mind control, which involves the cornerstone of our modern paradigm, by the way. Most people at NASA are not in on the lie, just as a child finding a quarter under their pillow where their tooth was the night before isn't in on the tooth fairy hoax, just as anyone else would if presented with flat Earth. Even people who work with NASA will dismiss this truth automatically as a ridiculous joke. This fallacious idea of Earth, or round Earth, tattooed into the collective subconscious extends to further implied associations, including gravity and space, and lots of reinforcing sort of ideologies that have been constructed into our belief system. And really, our understanding of the significance of the world itself in the grand scheme of things comes into play. All of this is associated with the culturally accepted and repeated concept of Earth, manufactured by the government, the federal government, via the schools, NASA, and of course the mainstream media, which merely parrots anything that a government official or a government agency claims. The media is no longer critical of the government, which is its, or supposed to be its primary function. The media is merely a public mouthpiece or a PR campaign for the government. And of course, to perpetuate the Republican versus Democrat false dichotomy, that's another one of their functions, is to perpetuate all sorts of divisive issues. But primarily, they're a mouthpiece for the government. Companies that manufacture exactly carbonated sugar water, for example, spend billions per year on advertising or propaganda. Similarly, NASA spends billions every year to manufacture and reinforce popular opinion using grandiose forgeries in terms of their rocket launches and cheap B films to less than adequately fake space travel, which are, of course, disseminated across the mainstream media mouthpieces as scientific fact. Their goal is, of course, not to explore space and to share knowledge, but instead to preserve the prevailing status quo, which entails the current prevailing model of the universe, ultimately perpetuating the need for a space agency. There really isn't much need for a space agency if space doesn't exist. They also take our tax dollars to patent technologies later to be sold to the public who were the original investors in the technology in the first place with our tax dollars.
We started with a little over 6,300 applicants, and we ended up selecting 8, 4 women, 4 men, who are absolutely incredible. And because we're accepting applications through February 18th for a new diverse generation of astronauts that will blaze a trail to Mars. You are absolutely correct that we don't have everything that we need to get humans to Mars. That is not in human exploration. That is in space technology. For a new diverse generation of astronauts that will blaze a trail to Mars. We don't have everything that we need to get humans to Mars. Because NASA and our partners are developing the technologies that drive both exploration and economic growth, I have 1,600 more reasons that the state of our NASA is strong. The 1,600 new technologies every year that we develop and the thousands of products, services, and processes that we help businesses transfer into the market for job creation and economic growth.
So what I did was, based on his claim that NASA is coming up with
The 1,600 new technologies every year.
That's a pretty staggering claim, a pretty staggering figure if you add up all the years that NASA has been doing this whole space exploration thing. But if you, and I didn't, really spend too much time on this, but if you take some time to try and research what exactly is NASA inventing, if you find what I've found is a bunch of circular sort of self-reinforcing propaganda, then a lot of claims, but in terms of what exactly are these inventions, and how are they benefiting people, and how is our investment in NASA being returned to us, the taxpayers, the investors, you really can't find much. Certainly, they've got Tang and Teflon. I mean, they are allegedly inventing some things, apparently, according to them, in space. But in terms of 1,600 inventions and patents per year, when you actually try to dig down, and figure out what they're doing, it's really hard to find anything more than the circular, self-reinforcing propaganda, right? Looking at this science exploration page, they're claiming that the NASA workforce is so ingenious that quite a few of its inventions are useful for those of us who stay on the ground. The agency has a special administration, and so, this is the top 10 NASA inventions, How Stuff Works Science webpage. They claim to have accomplished all of these great feats, but in all of these inventions, but again, what exactly are they inventing? Whenever I see the astronauts on the ISS, they're up there, playing with water bubbles and playing with toys and playing musical instruments. And so going through, the internet and trying to figure out, what sort of great accomplishments is NASA achieving up there in space, it's sort of difficult. They sure win awards given by the Inventions and Contributions Board for NASA developed software that has significantly enhanced the agency's performance. But software doesn't necessarily need to be, invented in space, right? They're getting lots of private contributions. And you'll notice here, if you try to click on certain links, as I've done here, you get this weird 404 cosmic item not found. And again, that was NASA's Inventions and Contributions Board winners. So it just seems kind of odd that we're not benefiting from all of these, 1,600 a year inventions from NASA. Now, I'm not going to read through all of this to you, so you can pause this and read it if you're interested, but, or, maybe it'd be a good idea to go to the Patent Office website and look up all of the 1,600 a year inventions that NASA does, but you'd think that NASA would advertise and boast about all of their inventions. One thing that I also found is that you get all of these different numbers in terms of how many inventions has NASA patented, or how many do they patent in a year. It just varies. It's almost as if you can't get two of the same answer. Chuck Bolden claims 1,600 a year. Other sources say it's a couple hundred a year. It seems to be sort of a black hole, or a brick wall, where if you do find any patents or real inventions from NASA, they're not exclusive to space inventions, and it seems like those patents are sold off to corporations as opposed to going back to the original investors, which is you and I, the taxpayer. The examples of their inventions, you get sort of generic explanations, technologies designed to mitigate the dangerous gases created as humans live and work in space. I'm not sure how that's going to benefit anyone on the ground. Inventions related to rocket nozzles, injection systems, and propellants that might help launch a new generation of commercial spacecraft. Methods for controlling airflow around vehicles in hypersonic flight. So they give you examples of inventions that nobody's ever going to verify. Nobody's going to go up into space and and verify that NASA has created this mitigating factor for dangerous gases, for example, or that their rocket nozzles would be any more effective in space than a jet ski that's out of the water. Rocket propulsion needs barometric pressure to work. We'll get into that in a bit. But searching out these NASA technologies is really sort of difficult, or it's interesting to me that you're not finding, you get emission control system, hydrogen peroxide concentrator, conducting composites of matter. You find these things, some of them are description not available, no patent abstract. So they're just like sort of ideas, and they're not actually plans, inventions, or patent. Method for manufacture of cord-stressed sandwich structures. I thought that was sort of funny. What is a face sandwich structure? Sandwich structure. Composite is a special class of composite materials that is fabricated by attaching two thin but stiff skins to a lightweight but thick core. The core material is normally low-strength material, but its higher thickness provides the sandwich composite with high bending stiffness with overall low density. Open and closed cell structure foams like poly blah blah, poly da da, polythene da 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 da. Open and closed metal form can also be used as core material. So NASA is responsible for sandwich core structures. Okay, that's an idea that I would submit did not necessarily need to be invented in space. Could have been invented on the ground just as easily. Seeing how people don't actually go to space, it obviously was invented on the ground, just like Teflon. I missed the link that I followed here, sorry. But researchers at NASA GSFC submit over 250 invention disclosures to the ITPO each year. 250. So they're claiming, less than a sixth of what Bolden claimed. So you're getting, again, these sort of differing numbers depending on the source. Just a couple of examples, definitions. You can read through this at your leisure. Protected technologies. Certain wheel assemblies, flight mirror mounts, aerodynamically stabilized instrument platform, space cube demonstration platform. They've got some communications, pseudo-noise modulation. I bet that's for their jet engines on the ISS. Pseudo-noise code modulation using return to zero pauses for ranging. It's for communications anyway. I was just kidding. Who knows? So, you know, you've got these U.S. patents and certain things like sandwich structures. Just looking into a little bit more to pseudo noise code modulation. Pseudo random noise code is one that has a spectrum similar to a random sequence of bits, but is deterministically generated, driven ground, electrical connections. Let's see what that is. Seems as if it has to do with grounding something out, as in an electrical circuit. Looking into high field superconducting magnets. Superconducting magnet includes an insulating layer disposed about the surface of a mandrel, a superconducting wire wound in adjacent turns about the mandrel to form the superconducting magnet, wherein the superconducting wire is in thermal communication with the mandrel, and the superconducting magnet has a field to current ratio equal to or greater than 1.1 Tesla per ampere, a thermally conductive potting material configured to fill in interslices between the adjacent turns, where the thermally conductive potting material and the superconductive wire, you can read that or pause it. So, you know, this sort of thing, you know, could have been invented by somebody on the ground who works for NASA. I just don't see the really sort of idiotic astronauts who play around in gorilla suits doing, you know, coming up with these sort of inventions. I think it's far more likely that NASA does have tons of money at their disposal. They've got bright minds for research and development, and so, you know, it's not a huge leap to see them coming up with some inventions, but it certainly does not appear, or at least it seems like something's fishy about their claims to the number of inventions and their contribution to humanity as a whole, you know, making them a good investment in people's minds. I think that they need to perpetuate this image of you know, exploration and sciences and technologies, research and development, in order to keep the Ponzi scheme going. But I haven't seen anything that indicates whatever they're doing is exclusive to, you know, space inventions. And by the way, this particular invention, I looked up Thomas P. Haight and Peter J. Sharon, and neither one of them are astronauts. So this proves that this invention was not made in space. It was made from people on NASA's payroll on the ground. So the idea that NASA is coming up with all of these inventions because they're in space and therefore we need to keep giving them billions of years to stay in space is ridiculous, even considering the inventions that they do come out with, which are just, you know, inventors on their payroll, inventing things on the ground in reality.
While we're at it, the state of our nation is strong because more venture capital was invested in America's space industry in 2015 than in all previous 15 years combined. Meanwhile, because for the 4th year in a row, we are the #1 rated best place to work in the federal government, the state of our NASA is...
We're seeing the kind of drift that is going to make our mission, the core mission that I believe it should be, difficult to reach. The budget request for Earth Science, put a little numbers to this 41% increase for FY16 is $1.95 billion. A lot of systems monitoring Earth, multiple agencies supporting Earth sciences, but we are without the basic required system to send pioneers to Mars. So 41% increase. But yet NASA, the only agency, the only part of our government that is working on sending people out there, doesn't have the basic capacity to do that while we're decreasing and increasing our sciences. So I know I'm running out of time, but I'm concerned that with the small amount of money that we've allocated to our mission that's been endorsed by the President. And Mr. Chairman, I'll yield it back to you.
Senator, may I make a comment? Because I want to make a slight correction. You are absolutely correct that we don't have everything that we need to get humans to Mars. That is not in human exploration. That is in space technology. This agency and this president has been we requested $1 billion when I became the NASA administrator to establish a space technology mission directorate, because the things that we're missing in being able to safely and effectively send humans to Mars, that the majority of that is not done in the Human Exploration Mission Directorate. I need it to be done in Space Technology Mission Directorate, and that's not funded efficiently.
So why not fund the Mars Opportunity Rover in the 2016 budget?
Mars Opportunity Rover, Senator, we are getting incredible data from Mars through Curiosity, through Opportunity. We're getting ready to send InSight. We cannot continue to operate instruments and missions whose time has passed, because I won't be able to put something like InSight on Mars in 2016 that for the first time ever is going to core deeper into the surface of the planet. I don't have a rover that can do that today.
From Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation. Sensors aboard will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
Being realistic, if space doesn't actually exist, again, there isn't any real need for a space agency, and if we are to fund scientific research and development, assuming they at least do that, which I'm not even sure that they do that, then assuming that they do, then shouldn't we benefit from the investment that we put towards that space agency instead of paying for the fruits of any of their research and development? Again, this goes back to what is the purpose of a corporation. The purpose of a corporation is supposed to be a public work, something that's going to benefit the public, and that's why they're able to collect money for projects. NASA, being sort of a black budget government organization, isn't exactly a corporation, but we are still investing in it with tax dollars, and we should be able to benefit from that investment if they do produce anything of value, which, I'm doubtful. The main thing is that NASA, much like the DEA imports hardcore drugs into the culture in order to perpetuate their existence, so too NASA fakes space to perpetuate their existence. If there are no drugs on the street and no drug dealers to arrest, then you have no use for a drug enforcement agency, right? So the DEA has a motive to import addictive drugs to the inner cities, which they've been caught doing. So NASA has a motive to lie about space for self-preservation, to perpetuate the ideology which underlies the culture we find ourselves in. NASA and the media must pump out propaganda to convince us of terra firma spheroids governed by gravity and the infinite vacuum of space, to solidify the popular opinion that we also live upon a spinning spheroid in the vacuum of space. In truth, it is a fool's errand to convince oneself that we know what the sun is and know what the stars are. This argument comes up a lot from globe earthers. They believe they know that stars are made up of hydrogen and helium gases, but are not exploding or burning as you would expect. They're performing the whimsical act of hot atomic fusion, which is theoretical and cannot be replicated by science or demonstrated in reality, nor would any such demonstration necessarily correlate to the sun or the stars could it be performed. Nuclear power is merely a high-tech form of steam power, and bombs that split the so-called atom to create devastating blasts that could wipe out entire cities do not exist. Like infinite space, atomic bombs are a well-executed propaganda campaign or fear porn that includes one of the biggest lies in history, which is the alleged atom bomb or nuclear bomb bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki back in World War II. These two Japanese cities were obviously devastated. They were carpet bombed and firebombed like so many other cities were nearing the end of World War II. Any alleged footage of nuclear blasts are military propaganda involving sometimes scale models and sometimes life-sized explosions containing not a nuclear bomb, but instead thousands of tons of TNT. And I would note that both Nagasaki and Hiroshima both are thriving cities today, so there isn't this, residual radiation that goes along with the fear porn that, if you nuke an area, it'll be desolate for hundreds of years. I would even go so far as to say, as most of the people in the military weren't in on this truth. This was a massive, massive hoax. The nuclear bomb, the construction of a nuclear bomb hoax was so massive that I believe that they used soldiers and even upper echelons of the military as unwitting, proponents for this lie. Just as one example, my grandfather was an engineer who helped to design the Minuteman missile silos. And I recently read an article that these silos are just basically, going to because nobody's taking care of them. They're just basically empty shells with 50s technology still in them. They haven't been upgraded, they haven't been kept up, and I would submit that is because, yes, these sort of things were built, and yes, they were probably housed with rockets, but there is no such thing as a nuclear bomb. It's theoretical, it's never happened, and any video evidence that you think that you may have seen to support nuclear bombs is probably just propaganda or is just propaganda. And even people who stood out there and watched the blasts, the soldiers that watched the blasts were apparently watching, 1,000 tons of TNT from a few miles away, which would be exactly the same thing as watching an atomic explosion of the same order of magnitude. By the way, nuclear fusion and nuclear fission are theoretical principles that have been pushed as fact, and I believe perpetuated through the use of so-called nuclear power, which is a misnomer. Nuclear power simply involves containing an enriched radioactive isotope and converting that radiation into heat energy to power turbines that generate electricity. Nuclear power is, again, it's a misnomer, and it's simply a complex version of steam power, with the heat source being an encased uranium or plutonium. The point is that people who claim to know about the stars as a collection of theoretical premises which have been inserted into our scientific record as somehow known facts, as if anyone has ever traveled to the sun or some distant star to confirm these beliefs. Nobody knows anything about a star or the sun. People just have theories and they believe in their theories. Has it occurred to scientists or the parrots of scientism that the helium and hydrogen believed to be undergoing atomic fusion based on the color of the light emitted, that our upper atmosphere plane, which is rich with lighter, less dense gases like hydrogen and helium, and perhaps the reason we're finding the signature spectrum coming from the sun, for example, has something to do or everything to do with the nature of our stationary atmosphere and not the theoretical atomic fusion supposedly occurring in the theoretical star itself 93 million miles away. It's quite obvious that light we interpret from the sun and stars is at the very least affected by our atmosphere, if not fundamentally rendered into the visible spectrum of light by the particles in our atmosphere itself. Wouldn't this act of refraction or diffusion of light by gases high above the Earth have some effect on the electromagnetic waves that they're rendering into the visible spectrum? NASA and the other space agencies cannot get their story straight as to whether the stars are blindingly brilliant in space, or if space is a deep black lacking all stars.
Could you tell us something about what the sky actually looks like from the moon, the sun, the earth, the stars, if any, and so on?
The sky is a deep black when viewed from the moon, as it is when viewed from cislunar space, the space between the Earth and the moon. The sky is a deep black when viewed from the moon, as it is when viewed from cislunar space, the space between the Earth and the moon.
Hey Chris, it's Katrina from the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. We all say hi. Astro YYZ here. Anyway, as an amateur astronomer, I'm interested in knowing what astronomical objects can be seen from the ISS, given you have so many lights around you, lights and machines. And is there anywhere dark you can go on station where you can look out and really get dark adapted and see what's out there?
Yes, sort of like a little kid leaving home. Most of our glances are back towards Mother Earth, but we do have windows that face the rest of the universe. And I spent some time looking at some actually yesterday, looking at one yesterday, and remarking on actually just your question that the sky is almost white with the light of the universe, with the uncountable number of stars.
The sky is a deep black.
The sky is almost white with the light of the universe, with the uncountable number of stars.
The sky is a deep black.
You can't see the constellations because the sky is just so alive with stars.
The most unexpected thing, I think, was the blackness of space. Most unexpected thing, I think, was the blackness of space. When you look the opposite direction and you see how dark space is, I mean, if the black is black and you realize just how small the Earth is in that blackness.
And that when I look out at the stars and I see, so many stars and planets and so many stars and planets.
The sky is almost white with the light of the universe, with the uncountable number of stars.
And what you see is an immensely deep blackness.
There with the world right there, and then when you look the other way, it's the whole universe, and the blackness is a palpable blackness. It's not just dark; it's forever.
The sky is a deep black.
And what you see is an immensely deep blackness. A blackness that it's like a black with texture. It's like a black, sort of like black velvet, but without any shininess to it at all.
You can't see the constellations because the sky is just so alive with stars.
How dark space is. I mean, if the black is black and you realize just how small the Earth is in that blackness, and that was a real surprise to me.
And we have to realize that in space, without the intervening atmosphere, the heavens are 10 times as bright, stars 10 times as numerous.
And what you see is an immensely deep blackness.
billions and billions of stars, and you can see it. In fact, they're so numerous, it's very difficult to pick out the constellations you and I see here on the ground.
A blackness that it's like a black with texture. It's like a black, sort of like black velvet, but without any shininess to it at all.
Some of the stars have colors we don't see here on the ground. So you see these pastel colors, light yellows, light pinks, light oranges, even light red ones, and light blue. There's all kinds of colors.
An immensely deep blackness.
It's not just dark, it's
White, with the light of the universe, with the uncountable number of stars.
When you look the opposite direction, and you see how dark space is. I mean, if the black is black.
I live in Colorado. When you get up on a clear night in Colorado, up in the mountains where there's no light and you can see all these stars, well, multiply that by 1,000. That's what it's like in space.
It's not just dark, it's forever.
And that when I look out at the stars and I see, so many stars and planets and so many stars and planets.
You can see the stars. Oh yeah. And pretty much all the time you can see the stars.
It's not a black void.
The sky is a deep black.
There's more than stars. You can see planets. You can see moons.
An immensely deep blackness.
You can see the zodiacal light. Whoa. Those are amazing. Right before
the lights of the zodiac.
The lights of the zodiac.
So what is it, astro liars? Are the stars so bright you can't make out the constellations, or is the sky so extremely dark like black velvet when you're in space? Much as the propaganda of nuclear weapons has reinforced the belief in the model involving atoms, which have never been physically seen, only assumed and assigned mathematical values which work in theory but cannot be proven, the propaganda from NASA reinforces the widely held belief in theoretical physics. Such grandiose lies feed the arrogance and egotism of theoretical physicists, aka hypothetical philosophers. The shape of the Earth and the nature of the sky beyond have already been explained to us all as children by others who had the same, very same model explained to them during their childhood, all reinforced by consistent outside sources infused into the curriculum for the duration of their education. Gazing at the stars and by some leap of logic and faith applying observations of these mysterious lights in the sky to prove the shape of the world is a pretty huge leap. However, with the constant propaganda from NASA, which they've pushed in the belief in physical, spherical terra firma planets in space, it turns out the alleged missions to Jupiter back in the 70s were lies. The moon landings were also lies. Nuclear bombs appear to be lies, and by extension the Cold War and the space race were also lies. The Antarctic Treaty must be on the up and up, right? I don't think so. I tend to doubt it. All of these lies spread by the federal government and its deep pockets for propaganda are a toxic combination of pre-programming, willful ignorance, unfounded assumptions, and an unquestionable belief in unproven theoretical concepts which must always be assumed. One prime example is gravity. This ultimately adds up to an impenetrable brick wall to scientific progress in the form of an unquestionable dogmatic belief. Any school of thought which contradicts these such theoretical premises is ignored or ridiculed, but never considered logically, of course. Over time, this bias has managed to somehow convince the entire world the exact contrary of reality, which is obvious to an honest, unbiased observer who rationally scrutinizes the heliocentric model and applies that comparatively to observable reality. The world is obviously stationary and without curvature, yet people will drop an object on the ground to allegedly prove that the world is a spinning spheroid governed by gravity. The only circumstantial evidence suggesting that the world spins at all involves the celestial bodies. Physical experiments such as Airy's failure show that the Earth is fixed and it is the starlight that is apparently moving. The motion of the celestial bodies is not caused by the spinning of the Earth, but they are apparently spinning around in a great circle concentric with the North Pole star, once per 24 hours. Of course, knowing what we know about magnetic fields, or specifically electromagnetic vortices, Starlight could be wildly distorted in terms of apparent position and velocity, or even angular size, by such principles attributed to magnetic fields interacting with visible light that are well known and documented. We're not talking about a ball Earth wrapped around lava spinning through space, but a stationary plane with a strong magnetic field emanating from the north. Since magnetic north is the central position around which, according to magnetic compasses from anywhere on Earth, even in the southern hemisphere, and Polaris remains above that point day and night from season to season, this proves the world is not a spinning sphere, but the obvious, most simple answer is that Polaris is a relatively nearby light source, which is marking the center of a massive worldwide electromagnetic vortex. Globe Earth proponents argue that it is the metallic molten core of the Earth that generates this electromagnetic field without any physical evidence or scaled-down reproduction of such a magnet to support this claim. For one thing, you cannot construct an unsupported shell around a spinning sphere of molten lava, but even if you could, there's no evidence to support the idea this would create an electromagnetic field, and of course the mysterious non-existing gravity waves necessary to hold it all together in the heliocentric model. In fact, molten metals, which allegedly fill up the center of the ball Earth, cannot be magnetized. Only solid-state metals can be magnetized, which is yet another big problem for the Globe Earth model. On to another point that really can't be ignored is the North Pole star Polaris. It's physically impossible to have the North Star appear to be a permanent central axis for all the other stars in the heliocentric model. Comparing dusk to dawn, an observer is facing in opposite directions into the universe. We're not talking about stellar parallax as a result of lateral motion of the Earth, theoretically, but instead we're talking about the angle in which you would be facing were the Earth a sphere, comparing dusk till dawn spinning around an axis. Furthermore, 6 months from this observation, or this set of observations, 6 months later, the same thing can be done and the North Star is still visible above the northern axis from dusk till dawn. When visible space should technically be on the opposite end of the universe compared to 6 months earlier. Again, this has nothing to do with how far we've theoretically traveled in 12 hours overnight, or 6 months around the sun, but instead this has to do with facing in total opposite directions in space in both of these circumstances. So imagine yourself on a track that goes around an oblong ring, like the tracks tend to do around high school football fields. So if you're on one side of the track facing towards the home bleachers, say, that represents visible space in the summer. If you run to the opposite side of the track and face the visiting team bleachers, that represents visible space during the winter. The center of the track obviously represents the sun in the heliocentric model, and any direction facing inward towards the center of the track would represent daytime. Anytime you're facing down the track, it would represent dusk or dawn, and facing away from the inside of the track would represent nighttime. Running once around the track would represent a year, and spinning once upon your vertical axis would represent a day. The fact that we can see all constellations year-round, even those found 90 degrees overhead from the equator, from somewhere on Earth, conclusively proves that the heliocentric model is incompatible with observable reality. On the other hand, this makes perfect sense in the static plane Earth model, considering we're not flying around the sun in a one-year cycle offset to the galactic equator by 60 degrees in our alleged orbital path. Instead, the stars are merely making circuits above the face of the Earth, which runs in nearly perfect daily cycles, returning to their original starting point from year to year, with the constellations never changing, without a unique set of constellations from season to season, as is demanded by the heliocentric model itself. All in all, whether by plain accidental circumstances or a bizarre conspiracy, the spinning globe Earth has been forced upon the minds of all recent generations of gullible toddlers, never questioned or scrutinized, even though the alleged proofs of the heliocentric model are flimsy, circumstantial evidence and even lies, which do not actually hold up under logical scrutiny or physical measurement by objective adults. First, we must cast aside the assumptions we previously believed that we knew, such as the size, distance, temperature, and even the weight of stars, People claim they know stars to be theoretical hot atomic fusion of some of the lightest gases known, hydrogen and helium, yet somehow create enough theoretical gravity to keep the hypothetically spherical Earth in orbit. Gravity also allows people to walk around on the sides of a spinning sphere at about 1,000 miles per hour near the equator, and around 750 miles per hour in the US, give or take. All in all, this has constructed a virtual prison for our minds, perpetuated by the federal government and modern philosophers. This psychological prison demands our world, and by extension ourselves, to be meaningless in the grand scheme of things. To be clear, by modern philosophers, I'm specifically referring to theoretical astrophysics. Honestly, I think the term mythology would probably apply to them more aptly than philosophy, for more than a few reasons. Mythologists, like those found at NASA, seem to incorporate occultism and esoteric symbolism into their projects. The majority of people apparently never caught on to this, but NASA blatantly advertises that it is indeed an esoteric occult group in plain sight. The people at the top of such organizations assume their imaginative, irrelevant theorem placed them on top of a pedestal, as they are not in jeopardy of being proven or disproven by any repeatable sort of experiment. One must assume yet to be proven non-falsifiable theorems such as gravity or knowing what the sun and stars are, and of course all the theoretical equations such as E equals mc squared as laws. Of course, understanding an equation and the equation accurately describing reality, or furthermore being a so-called law, are three completely different things. E equals mc squared, or energy equals mass accelerated at the speed of light squared, is intended to theoretically describe what pure energy is, or how it is formed in relation to physical matter and the speed of light. This is a very clever and interesting theory which may hypothetically work out mathematically, yet will of course never be physically tested, observed, or conclusively proven or falsified, as it is impossible to accelerate matter at the speed of light squared, and yet it is widely assumed and accepted by the scientific community as a proven fact of physics or another so-called law. The well-meaning, totally deceived scientists and engineers at CERN, for example, spend their lives, or their adult lives, interpreting data printed out of a very expensive lie machine called the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, Switzerland. These well-paid, highly indoctrinated scientists believe they are able to send atomic and subatomic particles through a vacuum tube with a 17-mile circumference. I would point out that atomic and subatomic particles are merely theoretical building blocks of matter, which have never been observed or conclusively proven. In truth, such tiny particles, which we are all taught to assume make up everything, the smallest building blocks of matter, probably don't exist as we were told. All in all, the archaic model of the atom is little more than the heliocentric model scaled down to make up all matter at the smallest levels, the nucleus of the atom representing the sun, and the electrons of the atom relating to the planets. According to this theory, a solid wooden table is mostly empty space at the atomic level, but again, this is all just theory and has never been proven. The idea of molecules being a composition of these theoretical atoms is also very convincing pseudoscience, but since the numbers work in practice, it is assumed that the theory is unquestionable. This is much like the observation "what goes up must come down" being explained by the theory of gravity, then pointing to the fact that what goes up must come down proves the theory of gravity. I'm not necessarily suggesting we give the scientists at NASA or CERN a free pass, but they are not entirely to blame for their ignorant arrogance and the perpetuation of much fantasy as science. The Large Hadron Collider is an example of a never-ending money pit that will keep the minds of experienced scientists on a perpetual wild goose chase for theoretical particles or waves of gravity which do not exist. Similarly, NASA manipulates our understanding of the celestial realm of the stars. CERN claims to be searching for dark matter, dark energy, antimatter, gravity, recreating the conditions moments after the initial mysterious action causing the Big Bang theory. My point is, since gravity doesn't exist, then dark matter couldn't possibly exist and has no theoretical need to exist, since it is a theoretical counterpart of gravity. In orbital mechanics specifically, which explain away the impossibility of orbital mechanics in a vacuum. The idea of the moon orbiting a spherical Earth is physically impossible, as the alleged gravity needed to slingshot the moon round the backside of the Earth's alleged path is apparently absent, and even opposite or repelling the moon from the Earth at times as the Earth is racing towards the moon, 2 weeks later. Technically, we should crash into the moon in less than a few hours at a specific period during each month if we were indeed racing towards it at 66,600 miles per hour, with gravity also tugging the moon in towards us with enough force to slingshot the moon round the back of the Earth's paths earlier that month. The fact that we do not crash into the moon every month, or the LISS every 45 minutes for that matter, are both very good proofs that the heliocentric model is wrong and NASA is lying and the Earth is stationary. Gravity itself is only necessary if the world is a spinning sphere, which it isn't, therefore gravity itself has no theoretical chance of existing, and the concept of third-generation satellite bodies such as the moon being governed by a theoretical force which doesn't exist is physically impossible. Finally, since the world itself is proven to be stationary, then the Big Bang obviously never happened either, as there's simply no room for a stationary physical plane in the hypothetical Big Bang universe. Gravity is therefore an unnecessary, disproved theory based on faulty assumptions. The atom is a theoretical fallacy, along with the so-called God particle and Einstein-Rosen bridges. Since all of these faulty theorems are irrelevant extensions of an illogical foundation, the entire purpose of CERN and NASA are shown to be a complete and total waste of money and brain power, and ultimately distract a cross-section of theoretical physics with hunting after proverbial unicorns, fairies, and goblins. CERN is claimed sometimes by the alternative community to have dark, ulterior motives, like designs on opening a stargate or a wormhole to another dimension, but of course even these sort of applications are based on relativity, space-time, and gravity, which are, again, unnecessary and irrelevant, don't exist. I would guess that most of the scientists and engineers at CERN are totally oblivious to the overall picture of what exactly is going on when they fire that thing up. Most are probably trained to read results of their experiment on a report generated by a computer, since they're obviously not hopping into the Large Hadron Collider while it's operational, of course. So they are relying on instrumentation, which could be nothing more than simulated computer-generated data. Who would ever know the difference? Even assuming they can collide particles at the speeds which they claim, how would anyone know the difference between a computer-simulated result and actual result? The answer is, the software created to monitor the Large Hadron Collider at CERN are obviously not something written by one single person, and to compromise or manipulate such software, all it would take is one single compromised person at a higher up level in the long line of software engineers to enable a simulated reading and make it appear to be an actual reading. In fact, such software would necessarily have the ability to output simulated data, and I submit it wouldn't take that much to trick the dedicated scientists at CERN into believing that simulated data is actual readings from smashing subatomic particles, which nobody can verify that is indeed what's occurring inside the giant circular tube. The theoretical physicists responsible for interpreting the data coming back from their tests are almost certainly not responsible for engineering the software, while the software engineers are probably not going to be involved with reading and interpreting the data spit out of the multi-billion-dollar lie machine. At any rate, there are some parallels to be drawn between entities like CERN and NASA, as they are both never-ending black holes for money and appear to be very much compartmentalized and purposefully misleading their compartmentalized industries supporting its function, and hence you get never-ending perpetuation of lies supported by well-meaning people who have no idea that there's any lies going on. The blatant fakery of NASA and the images they ensured we all associate with certain ideas such as Earth and space and a universe has been deeply implanted into the collective subconscious of the so-called civilized world. This is especially true for those who base their careers and claim to know what is occurring in terms of the lights in the night sky. The fallacious idea of an infinite universe with billions of galaxies, trillions of stars, and quadrillions of planets has been systematically, subliminally, and repeatedly shoved into our collective subconscious, making it nearly impossible for a normal person to consider the notion that their personal construct of the universe should be questioned or could possibly be questioned. The celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, and the stars are not spherical proof of our world's spherical nature, but are merely secondary features of the massive physical plane itself, and are no way indicative to the shape of our world in any sense whatsoever. In other words, just because the sun and moon appear to be spheres doesn't necessarily prove, by any stretch of the imagination, that the world itself is also a sphere. Just because scientists claim to know that stars are theoretical hot nuclear fusion of some of the lightest known gases, yet generate the most gravity in the solar system, doesn't mean they actually know what they're talking about. I think it's very possible that the sun is a symptom of conditions generated by the Earth itself, as opposed to the prevailing worldview that the Earth is a secondary offshoot created by the sun. The sun could involve ionized plasma in reality, beholden to the natural electromagnetic forces which are acknowledged to exist by science, but of course their explanation falls flat. You cannot make a ball magnet out of molten lava as claimed by Globers. However, you can demonstrate a monopole disk magnet, which is apparently the sort of layout we have on the flat Earth, which is essentially a giant capacitor plate, and is represented nicely by any magnet that you would find inside of a speaker. Again, that's a monopole, with the North Pole being in the center and the South Pole being every point along the outside edge. Now, I've mentioned this before, but modern science does not have a complete explanation for thunder and lightning. That's right, in the know-it-all age, the globe-Earth gravitic model does not allow, or has not produced, a rational explanation for lightning. Perhaps if science understood the truth, we could harness the sort of power generated by the Earth itself, as postulated by Nikola Tesla about 100 years ago. During the fake moon missions, which were nothing more than cheap B films produced by NASA, a branch of the US military, there's some really obvious proof that people have never gone to the moon, which isn't often spoken of. In part 2 of this series, we'll look at that in deeper depth. Until then, thanks for tuning in. Spread the word, spread the world, and peace.